And then you woke up where?
Well, I was back in the car and totally disorientated. And as far as I could remember on that particular night was us driving into this light. And I couldn't remember what had gone out on the field until several weeks later, actually, until we had driven back up there again. But when I got home that night, the first thing was that we had about an hour and a half that we couldn't account for. It just seemed to have gone instantaneously missing from our lives. Secondly, I was marked with an equilateral triangle mark underneath my navel.
How large or small would that be?
About 9 or 10 millimeters each way. And
what did that look like? The triangle, did it have a color, texture?
Yeah, it was red. It actually looked like a burn, or as if the first few layers of skin had been removed. And I think the most, well, I didn't pay a lot of attention to it. I noticed it because it was geometric, and I sort of was wondering, well, I wonder if this had anything to do with what we saw up in the sky, but then I thought, no, I'm being ridiculous, so I left that. But I think the main problem that occurred that night was that I'd started bleeding when I wasn't due, and quite profusely, and that continued for 3.5 weeks till I was hospitalised with an infection in the womb, which the hospital doctors had no explanation for. Now, as it happens, the two ladies in the second party also had gynecological problems, quite severe ones, instantly post-encounter. They were also left with the triangular marks underneath their navels.
And what did the diagnosis for that bleeding turn out to be? Well,
there was no diagnosis. There's even on the medical records I have, there's still question marks beside everything. You know, they checked out well, first they did pregnancy tests to even test that I'd been pregnant and something hadn't festered, and that was negative. They checked out endometritis, a whole heap of things, and all that they had was that there was a intrauterine infection, and they had really no explanation for why it had actually started.
Goodness. Now, you wrote about all the details of your encounter in this book, Encounter, which we'll be talking about in a few minutes for the audience and showing them some pictures out of it. So this didn't seem to be related to any pregnancy or anything like that. They just have question marks.
Yeah.
For your case.
Yeah, still on the medical records.
Oh my goodness. And how were they able to? They were obviously able to treat you for this. And what was the treatment?
Yeah, I was placed on a very strong drip of antibiotics for several days in hospital. Then let out, and yeah, it seemed to do the trick and heal the problem. But why the problem occurred in the first place is still a mystery, I guess.
Yes.
Anyway, I went forward to researchers. This was a bit of a problem. I knew something had gone on here, and I wanted to do something about it. My husband wasn't in agreement with it, but I just couldn't help myself, and I started ringing universities, and finally the Civil Aviation Authority put me onto UFO researchers, and at that time I had no idea that something like a UFO researcher existed, you know. I sort of thought that I'm the only person in the history of mankind that this has happened to.
So this was a subject you had no interest, no familiarity with, and this extraordinary experience happens to you.
Yeah.
And that is really what made you seek out assistance from people in the field. So how did that turn? Now, what about your husband, though? Let's backtrack a tiny bit, if you don't mind. Did he have any marks on his body?
No, he's the only one that actually, yeah, he and Bill, the male member of the second party, seemed to be the only ones that didn't have marks on their bodies.
So out of the 6 witnesses, there were 3 females or 4 females?
There was 3 females and 3 males. 3 females had marks and 1 male, but the other 2 didn't.
Okay. Does your husband, did he have recollection the next day also, or a few weeks later when you went back to that same place?
My husband, he remembered seeing the craft in the sky, and but whenever I mentioned anything out on the field, he would go absolutely ballistic. He would get really, really angry, and he denied it for a long time until about 2.5 years ago, when he finally came out and said, you know, admitted that, yeah, he remembers what went on out in the field, and he has memories of it too, and he's also seen these things at other stages throughout his lifetime before this, which really surprised me after all these years of him denying it. But you have to understand he comes from a Muslim background, and everything to him was anything to do with UFOs or this was totally demonic. So his idea was not to touch it, not to think about it, not to do anything with it.
He was trying to deny this whole event occurred.
Yeah,
now,
forget it and it'll go away.
Yeah, which obviously, as you know, doesn't work. Now, what about your background? What is, you said he was a Muslim. What?
I was a strange marriage mix here, but I was a full-on Pentecostal Christian at the time, which probably explains half of my reaction out on the field, because, you know, I thought I'd had a run-in with Satan himself while I was out there, and I think, you know, my hysterics had a lot to do with that.
I think having an upset reaction has a lot to do with everything. I mean, what an incredible amount of traumatic events to happen in a short period of time. So his reaction after was he didn't want to talk about it, and you obviously felt the need to do so. You had had physical problems. Did these physical problems end when you came off the IV, or were there some lingering physical effects that occurred after that?
There were still effects after the encounter. I think for about 9 months I had massive migraine headaches and extreme sensitivity to light and to noise. That seemed to clear up eventually, but this seemed to be immediately post-encounter effects. Whether that's from, I don't know what it's from, whether it's from the frequencies we felt out on the
Had you
field.
ever had migraines prior to this?
No,
and you were
never.
getting them how often?
On a daily basis. Some days I couldn't even get out of bed. They were so severe, all I'd want to do was feel like I was going to throw up all day, and I just couldn't lift my head off the pillow.
Goodness. And the doctors said what about these migraines?
Well, not a lot. I was sent for CAT scans, and there didn't seem to be any major problem at all.
Nothing was showing up in the medical tests, and they just
so it was
sent you home.
Yeah, and a few painkillers, and well, what else? It's a bit hard to tell doctors, oh, hold on, you know, I had this UFO encounter, maybe this could be linked to it. It just, you know, you just don't do things like that.
Right, right. Okay, so now you had started to lead us into the talk about contacting researchers in Australia?
Yes, in Australia. Phenomena Research Australia was the people that I eventually got in contact with. And I'm very thankful that I did, because they have now gone ahead and done what is considered to be probably the most thorough scientific investigation ever done on a UFO case in Australia.
And who was was it an organization or one individual?
No, it was an organisation, but it was headed by John Orgatel. Although it ended up expanding beyond that, the Monash University of Melbourne got very deeply involved in the on-field data collection and analysis as well. So
now this is very remarkable. Now we in this country, when there's a UFO case or a close encounter, the universities don't jump on board, and people don't start usually jumping on board to do good quality research. But you had a reaction like that over there. You're very fortunate.
Yeah, I was very, very lucky. And
now, were UFO phenomena, was that commonly talked about or researched
actually,
in Australia?
It's definitely been research going on for many, many years. There's been a lot more cases than will ever be brought out in public, but it wasn't an issue that was dealt with in public at the time.
So your case really was pivotal in bringing...
Oh, it opened it up, opened the media up in Australia incredibly. It was... but the research itself, I just want to go back to that for a moment.
Absolutely.
The on-field ground traces and data took 18 months of investigation. There was no expense spared. There was aerial surveys, infrared photography from the air. The magnetic readings taken were taken by a portable magnetometer, $250,000 worth of equipment, and only one of two in Australia.
Wow.
So they basically went all the way, and I've seen photographs of several acres of the field cordoned off into 1 metre blocks with pegs and ribbon, and samples were taken from every single block, and several times actually, and sent to two separate individual analysts. But the ground traces included a triangular mark out on the field that was first thought to be burns, but ended up being the chemical pyrene, which is a carcinogenic cancer-causing agent, but it does come naturally in small quantities in areas such as coal lodes, but geologically it shouldn't have been in this particular position, and certainly not in a triangular formation.
How large was the triangle formation?
The triangle was only, it was an equilateral triangle again, but the marks were only 20 feet apart. However, there was another very large magnetic anomaly in the shape of a semicircle. And actually, if I show you the picture of the craft we all drew, this is the original craft that I actually...
Here, tell you what, let's hold it up for the camera and we'll let them do a close-up. Okay, we're going to use this camera, correct? Which one are we using here?